Getting back to what the Community Preservation Coalition does, which is where I work, we do lots of technical assistance. So after this, if you have a question about CPA or really any time in the future, just call us or shoot us an email. We have a technical assistance hotline. We answer Monday through Thursday, and we do email 5 days a week. We have a great website, which I'll show you in a second, which hopefully you can spend some time visiting and learning more about CPA. We've added all your emails to a list for your email newsletter, and you'll be receiving not too often. We don't try not to bombard you. You can unsubscribe if you want to, certainly, but most folks find it pretty helpful. In addition, we do a lot of work on Beacon Hill, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight, and the good news lately that's come from Beacon Hill on CPA. We just finished working in 9 new communities, just like we worked in your community when you were looking at CPA. We also had 9 elections on election day as well in new communities. And then we do trainings, conferences, and things like what we're doing here tonight. We are supported by 3 different methods. All those nonprofits you saw provide a little bit of funding for us. We also apply for foundation grants the same way most nonprofits do. But the largest source, frankly, of our revenue comes from dues that CPA communities pay out of their administrative funds. To give you an idea of what dues are, there are different categories depending upon how big you are. You folks have local revenue between $250,000 and $500,000, so the dues are $1,750 a year. But you don't even have to worry about that now. You won't have an administrative account for over a year, or close to a year anyways. We are happy to help you get set up, and whenever you do have an administrative account in the future, after it's authorized by town meeting, we'll ask you if you're interested in joining. But for now, don't worry about it. Use us like you were a full member, because we do consider you that. So this is our website, communitypreservation.org. Anyone been to that at all yet to do a little research or background?
Yes.
You won't find anything on the state of Massachusetts website about CPA. It's like it doesn't even exist. They consider it to be a local program. There's no state government agency that has CPA staff or websites or information on that sort of thing. We're about it. And this website is pretty comprehensive. It's been there for 20 years that we've been gathering data on it. So it looks clean and simple, but there is a ton of data on there that you can take advantage of. And I'll particularly circle this tab up at the top called Technical Assistance. It brings down a drop-down menu, and here are just literally a couple of hundred different articles on all the aspects of CPA organized into these different categories. So feel free, if you're looking for a piece of information, to give us a call, email us, or just spend some time in this technical assistance section. You'll probably find what you're looking for there, and probably even a lot more than you're looking for as well.
Excuse me, just one moment. Carolyn, I think, did you see Janet in the? All right, so Tim can be promoted. Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right. So let me talk a little bit about CPA in general first, before we get into the specifics of what your committee does, which is going to be the bulk of what we're going to talk about tonight. But CPA has now 186 communities in Massachusetts, which is really incredible when you think about it, because each one of those communities have to pass themselves a small little tax increase voluntarily. And 53% of the cities and towns in Massachusetts have done that. And because we've had a number of cities join recently, of the larger cities, we actually have about 65% of the population of Massachusetts that lives in a CPA community. And we're really happy about this last stat, which that 186 communities have adopted it, but not one has left the program. And it is possible to exit the program the same way you come in. And so far, every community has found it really to be a great advantage to them. And no one has ever revoked CPA. This is definitely my favorite map of Massachusetts. It shows all the CPA communities. The cities are in orange and the towns are in green. And this map took a big jump on election day last week. We had 9 different communities adopt CPA, 3 cities. Let's see if I can get this right. Franklin, Framingham, And I'm drawing a blank on who the third city was.
Shrewsbury.
Excuse me?
Shrewsbury.
Thank you. No, Shrewsbury's a town.
Shrewsbury.
Nope, Shrewsbury's a town. Whitman's a town. They adopted.
Oh,
Gardner, Greenfield. Sorry, Greenfield was the third city. Way up there on the, that's a very top, a little orange at the top of that Connecticut River Valley group of communities. The town of Lee adopted, Whitman, Shrewsbury, Hopedale, probably forgetting one or two. Lancaster was the other one. I think I got them all there. That brought us up to 186 communities in the CPA program. And we have one of these maps you can download on your website. It makes a nice little frame on your wall there if you want, or on your bulletin board at Town Hall there. Margaret, feel free to download one. So CPA has been really a tremendous success. Whether you look at that map in terms of the number of communities where folks have agreed to tax themselves voluntarily for these things, these quality of life issues, or if you look at the actual statistics that are in front of you now, these are through the end of FY20, the stats on what communities have done with their money. Historic preservation is the largest category of CPA in terms of numbers of projects. It's not necessarily the largest in terms of money. The money actually breaks out fairly evenly if you look at it, but historic preservation, the projects tend to be a little smaller. So we've had over 12,000 projects you'll see there at the bottom of the screen, and about half of them have been in the historic category. We're up over 31,000 acres of open space that's been preserved with CPA. Outdoor recreation is clearly the fastest growing category, and we'll talk about why in a second, with 2,700 projects funded. And then for affordable housing, which is arguably the most difficult part of CPA to get going, especially for rural or suburban communities, but we have helped create over 20,000 units of housing in Massachusetts. So add it all up, believe it or not, CPA has raised $2.5 billion in less than 20 years, which is incredible. The level of funding has been allowed a lot of great improvements for communities. And I think that's why it remains popular today. So let's talk about the money a little bit. And folks always are curious about how the money piece of CPA works. So we're going to spend a little time delving into it, and then we'll talk about what it means to be on a community preservation committee and what some of the things you need to do over the coming months are. So the big attraction, I think, for CPA is the fact when a community joins, they get a match from the state every year. And in fact, it's ironic that this training was scheduled today. I don't think Margaret and I knew this when we scheduled it, but today turned out to be Trust Fund Distribution Day, when all the communities got their matching money today. It happens anywhere from the 1st to the 15th of November. And as luck would have it, it was today. The trust fund is a true trust fund. It's administered by the Department of Revenue, and the funding comes from fees that are collected at the Registry of Deeds. So anytime you step to the window at a registry, there's 26 registries in Massachusetts, and you record a deed or a mortgage discharge or a trust filing, any piece of paper you file at the registry, there is a fee you pay to the Commonwealth for that. And $50 of that fee goes to the CPA Trust Fund. Municipal lien certificates are only $25, but the rest of the documents are $50. That money goes directly from the window at the registry right to the Department of Revenue. They dump it into a trust fund, and the only thing they can do with that money legally is to distribute it to the CPA communities in November every year. The good part about CPA is recently is that we had never had an increase in those fees. They used to be $20 and $10 for municipal lien certificates. It had never increased in 20 years. And the legislature finally agreed to increase those beginning at the beginning of January this year, from $20 to $50 for most documents and from $10 to $25 for municipal lien certificates. So when that match was announced today, It was significantly higher than it's been in the past, and it'll remain that way for quite a while. The match was 28.6%. And when we say 28.6%, what we mean is that is the percentage against what you raised locally. So a community that raised $100,000 locally from their CPA local surcharge today receives a check for $28,600. Now, there's a caveat to that, which is communities that adopt CPA at 3% get extra money on top of that 28.6. And it can be significant. And you folks are one of those communities because you adopted CPA at 3%. So this is your distribution for today. Chase, our communications director, after we put out the newsletter and all the postings on our website today at about 3 o'clock, Chase said, should we do a slide just for Berlin for your presentation tonight, showing them how much money they received? And so Chase threw this in there at the last minute. So the first year you had CPA was last year, FY20. And so your assessors and tax collectors were collecting your 3% surcharge for the entire year in FY20. And that added up to $290,392. So between July 1st, 2019 and June 30th, 2020, which was FY20, you collected $290,000 locally from your surcharge. Now you get a match for that. The match always comes after the year has finished. So the year was over on June 30th. Now in November, you get your match. So your match comes in 3 rounds. Everyone else only gets the first round. But if you're a 3% community, you get 3 rounds of funding. So you received $83,000 on the first round. That is the 28.6% that I was talking about. $83,000 is 28.6% of the amount of money you raised locally, $290,000. But then you received a second round distribution of $69,000, and you received a third round distribution of $44,000. I won't take the time to bore you with the formula and how that works. There is an article on our website that explains it. Or I can bore you if you really want to. You can raise your hand if you want to be bored with the formula, but suffice to say, it really helps when you are a 3% community. And it also helps if you are a smaller community or a community that is a lower socioeconomic status. So it's weighted to help smaller communities and less affluent communities. And so when you add it all up, on $290,000 of local revenue, you received a check today for $197,541. And that is,
Wow.
that is 68% of what you raised locally.
I saw the newsletter this afternoon and I was blown away.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
How adopting CPA at 3%, if you're a small community or a less affluent community, it's so smart to do that because you can see the numbers right here. Look at all the extra.
I mean, $500,000.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. It adds up to $500,000. And that's 1 year's worth of funding. The local state, that's 1 year. So the interesting thing is you folks and I think Great Barrington and one other maybe are the only communities to adopt CPA at 3% in like the past decade.
Huh.
We have about 75 towns that are at 3%, but almost all of them are from the beginning of CPA, you know, when it was definitely a different economic time, you know, 2000 to 2008, 2009, maybe 2010. That's when the bulk of the 3% communities adopted. So it's very rare these days that folks can get their populace to go along with a 3% surcharge. But if you do, you know, you can really see what it does. And I would encourage you, maybe as one of your first acts as a community preservation committee, to let folks know about this. You know, maybe send out a press release to your local paper, maybe an email to all the boards and committees in town showing what you got from CPA. I mean, this is an amazing story. And it's the first time, on the day of your first meeting, you get your first piece of news about the local CPA program, and it's really terrific news. So, feel free to shout from the mountaintops here, and just wear a mask while you're doing it, feel free, because it's just great news for you folks. So how ironic that worked out for today. All right. So any questions on the money piece that folks have, how the trust fund works, or how the match works, or how your local surcharge works? All right. It's not something you really as a committee are going to need to deal with. Your town officials are going to collect all the set taxes. They're going to put it in the proper accounts. They're going to keep all the books and the accounting and all that. You guys just get to spend the money, which is terrific. They'll do all the work, and you guys get to decide what to do with the money. I think Carolyn had a question.
I do. So I did do a little bit of research on how the formula goes, because we actually do have, conservation is looking at some land in town.
Mhm.
So I was trying to glean how much we might be able to expect.
Yeah.
And the way the cities and towns are weighted is that, are we assuming the population doesn't change much and the socioeconomic status of the town doesn't change much, can we expect to be weighted about the same every year?
Well, I think so. They divide all 351 cities and towns into 10 deciles.
Okay.
And offhand, I don't know what decile you're in, but we'll look it up at the end of the presentation. And they do shuffle the deciles every year based on population statistics, and it's actually your equalized property values. It's some bizarre statistic that I don't even understand, although Margaret's nodding her head. Like she understands it. But they don't tend to shift very much. So
Okay.
if you're in decile 6, the odds are you're going to be in decile 6. You might drop to 5 or go up to 7, but you're going to be in that range every year. So the real function is how much money is available in the trust fund to begin with, because if there's just a little bit of money, it's going to flow through and you won't get 60%. You might only get 40%.
Right.
But if there is as much money as there was today, you can pretty much be guaranteed that your match is going to be in this range.
Excellent.
But the trust fund does fluctuate, I will tell you. The real estate market ebbs and flows in Massachusetts. And if you want to know how good your check's going to be next year, just watch the real estate market in the coming year. And if you see a lot of houses being sold, a lot of volume in real estate activity, or if you see refinancing rates go lower and everyone's refinancing their mortgages, you can be sure that one of the lagging indicators is you're going to get a higher match next year. But if you
Stuart,
see real estate market ground to a halt, or interest rates start going up, where people are going to stop refinancing, then the trust fund is going to be a little bit less.
Stuart, I have a question. It's Margaret. I don't know if you can see me on your screen, but my question is on the state distributions. So we know that there are those buckets that we have to put at least 10% of the CPA revenues in locally. But the state distributions, do those just go into the town's general CPA fund, and CPAC will actually determine where those monies are spent? Or do they have to be proportionately distributed among the cited buckets?
Yeah, they do. So, we're going to talk about budgeting in a second, and it'll be clear in the little pie chart I put up. But the 10% requirement to reserve or spend 10% in open space and recreation, 10% in housing, and 10% in historic applies to both sources of your revenue added together. So you add up, when you do your budget in the spring, which you didn't do a budget this past year because you guys weren't formed yet, but you'll see when we're going to put together your budget today, actually, and you'll see that if you, let's go back one, if you received $290,000 locally and you got close to a $200,000 check from the state, like Carolyn said, that's $500,000 in revenue. So you would be putting $50,000 into each of the 3 reserve accounts. So it is both sources of revenue added together. Good question. All right. So we're going to talk tonight mainly about what your job is as a CPC in the coming year. What are the things you're going to be working on? Um, and uh, how you're going to set up your program basically going forward. So just to give you an idea of if a community like yours was being trained at about this time of year, this would be a typical workflow. And this is certainly up to you. We've had communities rush this process because they had a big land purchase from the conscom, and they walked in the door and said, yeah, we know you got to do all this planning stuff and whatever, but we can't miss this opportunity. So we've had communities vastly accelerate this timetable. We've had communities that have really taken a really long, thoughtful approach to their CPA plan and got lots of feedback, and and didn't take their first project applications for quite a while. But just to give you an idea of what it would normally be for most communities, this starting at this time of year, you would begin working after this meeting on a CPA plan and some application materials. The plan is required by the law. It says you have to do, like a little CPA plan. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. And communities typically work on application materials and criteria, getting ready to accept project applications. And that can take, 6 months or more, to work on all that and put it all together. This coming spring, you're going to need to submit a budget to town meeting the same way the town does their regular budgeting every spring. You're going to do a CPA budget every spring. And so your first one will be submitted to the town meeting in the spring. What month do you have a town meeting? Is it May?
First Monday in May,
First Monday in May.
unless there's a COVID delay.
A pandemic, yes. And then typically communities start accepting applications in the fall, and then make their first project awards the following spring. So if you followed along, you would work on your applications and your plan, and then open it up, September 1st of next year, maybe when everyone gets back from the summer, and say, hey, we're open for business, submit applications. And then you'd vet those applications and make your recommendations. And in spring of 2022, town meeting would approve the first slate of projects. So this is just a rough timetable. Feel free to toss it in the trash or go by it or tweak it. But that's a typical work cycle for your committee over the next, basically, the next year and a half. All right, so let's dig into those first year responsibilities and that plan. So what the law says is you have to assess the community preservation needs of your town. And it tells you that you need to review all the other planning documents out there. This is not a master plan. You're not doing this from scratch. You're really looking at all the other relevant plans that already exist in town, and taking the CPA pieces from those plans. So the master plan probably talks about housing in some respects. It may talk about parks. If you have an open space and recreation plan, either a current one or even an expired one would be very helpful to learn about what the community needs for open space. If you have a housing plan, those sort of things are what you look at. You are going to talk to a lot of other committees in town and get their input on what they see as the priorities. What does the planning board see as the housing needs of the town? Is it we need more housing for seniors? Is it we need more housing for families? Do we need multifamily housing, single family housing? You're going to meet with the recreation committee and say, hey, how are our fields doing? Do we not have enough soccer fields? Do we have a park that's in terrible shape that needs rehabilitation? You're going to meet with the conscom and say, hey, what are the big parcels in town that might be coming up that we'd like to protect, or the big farms that we'd like to keep in farm production. So you're going to get input from the plans that exist, the other committees in town, and then you're also going to hold a public hearing at some point to get input from the general public on CPA priorities. You wrap all that up and you prepare your community preservation plan. You're not in this alone. You're, community number 172 probably to do a CPA plan. And if you looked at all 172, you'd see a surprising number who cut and paste, the best from each plan in different communities. We have 5 or 6 really good plans on our website. We try to put them all up in a Word document, so feel free to cut and paste. If you see, you know, there's a lot of good ideas out there from the 20 years CPA's been around. And don't feel like you're all volunteers. You probably don't have a vast staff at town hall to rely on and a a gigantic planning department. So feel free to look at these other plans that are out there that we have on our website, or maybe talk to some of your neighboring communities, and beg, borrow, and steal to come up with a good plan for your community. So that's really the first task that you're going to work on in the coming months. Now, yearly, you are going to have to update that plan every year, and it's usually a minor update. Maybe some things have changed. Maybe you got all the soccer fields redone, and now you want to focus on the parks or the baseball fields, whatever it is. So you'll have a public hearing every single year. That's required by the law. You'll have to do a quick update on the plan every single year. And by the way, this plan is not like a master plan where it has to be accepted by town meeting. It's just your planning document. It'd be nice to post it on the website, but once you guys do it, it's done. It doesn't have to go anywhere for approval. It doesn't have to go to the state or anything like that. Every year, you're going to look at the financials of the program that the town officials have tracked, and all the spending that's been done. You'll prepare a budget every year for town meeting in the spring, and you'll make project recommendations. And it's really these last two, that's the main part of what it means to be on a CPC. In the end, you are doing a budget every year of what's going to happen with the CPA money, and you're making recommendations on projects to town meeting. So those are the two main ongoing tasks, along with these other updates. All right, so again, feel free to jump in anytime. I can't see all of you on my little screen. I can see 4 of you, but I'm assuming there's a couple more people down below there. But if you do want to, there everyone is. Okay, so if you want to ask a question, just speak up, because I might not be able to see all of you. All right, there's 2 really dense parts to this presentation tonight. One is the budgeting, and the other is what's called allowable uses. So grab your Excedrin and let's jump into the budgeting for CPA. All right, so as I said, you're going to do an annual budget every year. Most communities do it at the same time as the town budget. It doesn't have to be done that way. Rockport has a dedicated fall town meeting every year, and they do all their CPA stuff in the fall. They do their CPA budget in the fall, and they do their projects in the fall. And a few communities do that, but in general, it's usually done at the same time in the spring as your town budget. And that's up to you folks, as you want to do that. Do you have a regularly scheduled town meeting in the fall, or is it just catch as catch can usually?
It's catch as catch can, I think. I think it's more frequent than not. I'm pretty new here. I don't know what everybody else's take on it, but it's not regularly scheduled.
No, but it's fairly often we have a special town meeting in the fall.
Right. The problem is, if you got to a point where you didn't, if it wasn't a guaranteed thing, you'd be in trouble, because you wouldn't have a vehicle to do your budget. And if the meeting happened to be scheduled after the tax rate was set, that's also an issue too, because your budget has to be completed before the town sets its tax rate. You set your tax rate in November, December period timeframe?
At the very latest November. We're usually earlier than that. Yeah,
No.
we were late September, early October this year.
You have twice a year tax billing, or 4 times a year?
Twice, 2
Oh.
times, yeah, semi-annual, yeah.
You're one of there aren't too many left in the state that have twice a year tax billing. You're definitely going to want to do your budget in the spring then. Your tax rate is set very early. You're not going to be able to rely on having a fall town meeting. So the Rockport idea, I think, is going to be out the door for you folks. All right, so this budget, when you do your annual budget, it does require a recommendation from you. So you folks, with help from your municipal officials, but you're the ones that are actually doing the budget, and someone's going to make a motion at your meeting. I move to recommend the following budget to annual town meeting. And your budget is based on those 2 sources of revenue we talked about. It's your estimated local revenue and your estimated trust fund distribution. So you're going to need some help from your, town accountant and your financial folks. They're going to have to give you those two estimates. Maybe in February, March, sometime there, as you're getting ready to go to, the closing of the warrant for town meeting. You're going to be working on your budget. You're going to need an estimate of the FY22, local revenue, which last year was, what did we say? It was 297. So, it'll probably be 310, 305, goes up every year just a little bit. And your municipal officials will be able to give you an estimate of that coming in the early spring, late winter, early spring. And DOR will put out an estimate on the trust fund distribution every March. So you'll be able to use that estimate. And you'll add those two together, and that's your top line figure. So it's going to be around $500,000 is your total budget that you're going to have to work with. It'll be a little more next year, but that's the general range of it. All right. So, why isn't that working? Okay. All right. So, from that $500,000, you do have a few requirements that Margaret hinted about. CPA is generally, very loose with the requirements. There aren't a lot of state mandates in here. This is really a program. It's a local program. It's really up to you guys as to what you do with your money. But there is one requirement, and that's the fact that every year you have to spend or put in a reserve account for later spending 10% of your total revenue for housing, 10% for open space and recreation, and 10% for historic. So on a $500,000 budget, the CPC is either got to do a housing project worth $50,000, or more likely you're going to recommend that $50,000 go into the housing reserve, and $50,000 into the open space and recreation reserve, and $50,000 in the historic reserve. And I think if you're okay, I'm going to use $500,000 as your budget figure. It's easy to figure out. The percentages won't tax my brain. I'm going to have to
Easy math.
So let's say $500,000 is the example we're going to use tonight for everything. Note that open space and recreation share a reserve account. So by open space, we mean conservation land, fields, forests, farms, wetlands, and recreation is more active things. So athletic fields, parks, playgrounds, trails, things like that. Community gardens, those are recreation. They share a reserve account. So you can use that 10% for each type of project. So that's one requirement. You also can, and almost everyone does, put up to 5% away in an administrative account every year. Now, that administrative account is for use of your committee in running the CPA program. It's not for use of Margaret and her staff at Town Hall to run Berlin's CPA program. It's the CPC's program in your budget. And we'll talk about that in a second. And by the way, I'm in a panic right now because is it Berlin? Berlin? It's Berlin, right?
Berlin.
I knew I was going to do that. I was in serious trouble when I went to Holyoke, which I burst out laughing when I saw that we had someone here on the committee. Is it James?
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw that spelling. I saw your spelling of your name, James, and I had a panic attack. I was like, oh my God, that's not how Holyoke spends it. Is his name going to be Holyoke or Holyoke, whatever? So if I say the name,
I like to think it's spelled the right way.
there you go. So forgive me. I'm going to screw this up now. But maybe I'll just.
You're touched that you even thought about it.
Yeah.
Maybe you can be Bolton for tonight. Can I pretend I'm training Bolton or all right. So up to 5%. So that's $25,000 you could put into an administrative account. Most CPCs do put the full 5% in. And it, spend very little of it, but it's nice to have it. And then the balance is for anything you want in all four areas. So you could use the last 65% on housing projects. You could, split it among the different areas. You could save it for the next year. It's completely flexible, the remaining amount of money.
Right. But it does have to be spent in those categories, correct?
In those 4 categories, yes,
Yeah.
yes. That is the grand extent of CPA. You have really 5 things you can spend money on. You can spend money on your administrative budget, for someone to take minutes and, advertising the meetings in the newspaper, the public hearing in the newspaper, and whatever we'll talk about the administrative expenses in a second. So you can spend money on administrative expenses. You can spend money on housing projects, open space projects, recreation projects, and historic projects. And that is it. And that's why the second headache I'm going to give you tonight is when we talk about allowable uses. It's what is a housing project? What is an open space project? Because you'll be surprised at what people walk in the door claiming to be a historic project that is not a historic project. So that's a big task, the allowable uses. All right, any questions on this? All right, so now let's delve into the budget. And for some reason, my computer sometimes doesn't want to switch the slides. Okay, all right, unfortunately, I'm going to have to present you 3 different budget opportunities because you're a little late in getting going because of the issues with town meeting approving the bylaw and all that. You really have 3 budgets to take care of: FY20, 21, and 22. And of course, they all going to have different rules apply to them because one of those years is over. One of those years, the tax rate has already been set. Margaret, you set your tax rate this year. And one of the years is this coming spring. So I got to take you through all 3, and I'm sorry about that. Normally I only have to do 2, but you folks are going to need 3. So this is your typical budget. So from FY22 onward till infinity, this is what a budget is going to look like for you folks. And we'll double back and we'll do FY20 and 21 in a minute. Okay. But this is your typical CPA annual budget. This is what you're going to be working on to present to town meeting next spring. So we talked about the first thing you got to do is total up that, that top value. How much money are you going to get from the state? How much money are you going to get locally? It's going to come out around 500,000. So you're going to take that figure and you're going to recommend that town meeting put $50,000 in the housing reserve, 50,000 in the historic reserve, and 50,000 in the open space and rec reserve, right? So that leaves you 350. Now, if you want to, you can do an administrative account like most folks do. That's going to be 25,000. That's 5%. So now we're up to now we're down to 325 that you have left, right? Now, at that 325, you might have some projects to do, but probably not this year. If you follow that timetable we talked about, you won't be doing projects till the following year's town meeting because you're still going to be in the planning stages and getting all set up. So you have $325,000 of revenue that you haven't done anything with. And when you do a budget, you have to tuck every dollar of that $500,000 you anticipate getting, you have to tuck it in some account to be able to spend it. Just like when the town does its $500 million municipal budget, it has to tuck every dollar of that $500 million into a place. Some of it goes into the school budget. Some of it goes into the road budget. Some of it goes to Margaret's salary. The bulk of it, 400 million or so, goes to Margaret's salary. Some of it goes, to the heat and hot water. But every dollar has to go somewhere in the budget. And same thing with CPA. So you're going to want to recommend the town meeting put that $325,000 in a budgeted reserve account. It's just a little municipal accounting term, and it ensures that that money is going to be available to you throughout the fiscal year if projects come up to spend it.
If you, let's say we divide the $300,000 balance evenly between the 3 accounts, and then something comes up where one of the, a housing project comes up and you want to take some of the money from one of the other accounts and put it into housing.
Right. Okay. So great question. So you could do what Carolyn suggested. You could take 100,000, let's say it was 300,000, not 325. You could take 100,000 and add it to the housing reserve, 100,000 to the historic reserve, and 100,000 to the open space reserve. You don't want to do that. Carolyn's idea is terrible. Don't
Don't listen to her.
don't listen to her. It's a terrible idea because once money goes into a reserve account, it can only be spent on that category. You can't
Oh.
transfer it out. So that's exactly why you're putting it in a budgeted reserve. And if you want to, some communities put the word undesignated in front of that account. They call it the undesignated budgeted reserve. And that's the very reason you do it, is you're keeping that money available for whatever might come up. So, you could put more money in those reserve accounts. It's a minimum of 10%, but you really don't want to, unless, you might be saving for something, it might be on everyone's mind that they know in 5 years, town hall is going to need, a complete rehab. It's a beautiful historic building. And we want to keep socking extra money away in the historic reserve because we're saving up to do a big project at town hall. So there are, some reasons why you might want to stuff extra money in a reserve account. But in general, it's better to stay, if you don't have a need to spend it right there, save it in the undesignated account. That makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. So, we will help you do this budget this year. So, come January, February or whatever, we'll get I'll help you, we'll get the figures from town hall of what they anticipate the local collections will be, and DOR will come out with their projections. And then I can actually help you prepare the warrant article to send to Margaret for town meeting. And the CPC will vote on it. We'll have a warrant article. We'll fill in the numbers together, and then you guys can vote it on your meeting and send it off to town meeting. And then someone will have to be brave enough to stand up in front of town meeting and explain what a CPA budget is, because this will be the first time they'll see anything like this, and they're going to want an explanation. They're going to want the same explanation I just gave you of why do we have to put money in these reserve accounts, and what's this administrative account, and et cetera. So one of you will have to take it over. And by the way, I even have a script. I was chair of my CPC for 5 years. I live in Boxford, and I saved the script I used that described the annual budget. And I don't know why I saved it, but I'm glad I did, because I've sent that to like 50 different communities. The first year. I used my same little script that I read in 2003, I think, explaining the annual budget. So remember that I told you that, and I'd be happy to send that to you. All right, so that's what you're going to do for this coming spring to prepare for FY22 and every year thereafter. All right, so now let's clean up FY20 and FY21. FY20 is the fiscal year that just ended this past June 30th, and you collected revenue, right? You collected $297,000 in FY20, but guess what? You guys weren't a committee then, and so therefore you didn't put 10% in the reserve accounts last year, and you're required to do that. It's not too late. The Department of Revenue realized that most communities are not organized enough in their first year of CPA to be able to do that through the town meeting process. So CPA legislation gives the town accountant special permission to put that money in the reserve account without you guys having to approve it, or without town meeting have to approve it, just for the first year you're in CPA. So just for FY20. So I would suggest that maybe the CPC vote on this and send a memo to the town accountant at maybe your next meeting in December. Someone make a motion. I move to ask the town accountant to reserve, $50,000 in each of the 3 reserve accounts per bulletin 202. I can't even read that because it's behind. It's behind 202 dash. I can't even read it because your little squares are behind that. But that way you'll have a paper trail, right? It'll be in your minutes that you took care of the FY20 reserve account. You didn't skip that step. And then someone can send a quick email to the accountant asking them to do that. Now, one thing I'll tell you is that the town does need to track how much interest your CPA fund earns. And that is paid back to the CPA fund, either monthly or at the end of the year, however your community chooses to do it. But it is required that the town keep track of how much money, how much interest that $297,000 earned as it was collected last year. It won't be a ton these days in the low interest environment. But you want to make sure that you see that on your financial reports you get from the town, that the interest has been credited to the fund every single year. All right, any questions on cleaning up FY20? All right, now we also have to clean up FY21, the year that we're in. And DOR does not give the town accountant permission to do it him or herself. So you have to go through the CPC recommendation and town meeting. The tax rate is already set for this year, which means you are really not going to have much money to spend this year. You're really not going to be able to spend any of your FY21 money because you didn't have a town meeting and put it into a budget before the tax rate was set. In order to be able to spend your money, you have to do a budget before the tax rate is set. So that's okay though. You know, if something comes up, you have last year's money, right? That was collected, and you have next year's money. But this year's money is going to be in purgatory for a little while. But you still have to do those 10% reserve accounts. So at next year's town meeting in the spring, or if you have a special town meeting before then, you are going to want to clean up FY21 by putting money into each of the 3 reserve accounts.
Okay, so Stuart, this needs to be effective. Those reserves need to be put into the categories effective prior to the end of June next year, correct? That's FY21,
Correct.
right? Okay, okay, just.
And let me go back because I misspoke on FY20. I didn't read my notes at the top. In FY20, you didn't get a state match. You only had your local revenue in FY20. You get your state match at the end of the year. So you just got your state match today. It's based on what you collected locally last year, but it's revenue to this year. The check actually came today. So it's revenue to FY21. So last year, all you collected was your local money, the $297,000. So you're
That's all we vote on for the budget for FY21, 20.
It'll be $29,700 in each of the 3 reserve accounts. And you don't have to, yeah, you're going to vote on it just to send a memo to the town accountant. That's just a housekeeping matter, but the town accountant can do that on their own. Yeah, sorry, I misspoke there. Last year was just your local revenue. Now, every year going forward, you'll have 2 sources of revenue, the local and the state. Does that make sense to folks? Okay. All right. So you think you'll have a special, Margaret, before next May?
We will make sure we do. Might be outside. It might, you know, might look different, but we'll do something.
Don't do it just for this purpose because
Oh, the board has already postponed a fall special town meeting, so we'll just move everything to the spring.
so you know, Margaret, maybe you can remember to put if you see a warrant starting to come together for town meeting, put a placeholder in there. All right, so just to recap, and this is good because Margaret has to leave shortly, and this is really the part that is mostly for her. So just to recap, you're going to have the town accountant create those 10% for FY20. You're going to make a recommendation to the next available town meeting for FY21's 10% accounts, and then you're going to do your first full budget for next spring's town meeting. And town meeting has to approve number 2 and number 3. All right. How bad was that?
Theoretically, those 2 will all look the same at this point. It'll be the 3 10% categories with the balance going into an undesignated account.
You're talking about FY21 and 22?
Correct.
Yeah, no. For FY21, that money is all in purgatory. The only thing you can do is what's statutorily required. That when the tax rate was set, that $500,000 was actually put off to the side. It's a municipal accounting measure. It'll come back to you when the town closes its books next summer. But if you don't do a budget before the tax rate is set, that money is kind of just sitting in the town accounts and you can't get at it.
I have a question.
Yes.
What about having the tax rate set makes it,
Why is that?
puts it in purgatory? What's so special about the tax rate being set for ahead of that?
MJ, I wish I knew the answer to that. It's not a CPA thing. It's a municipal thing. So, you know, it applies to your municipal budget too. If you don't have a town meeting to do your municipal budget, you wouldn't be able to spend any money.
Well, I get why the town meeting is important because that's oversight, but since we're working, essentially on percentages, it just seems odd to me that, why the tax rate figures into whether we can make decisions just seems odd to me.
Yeah, I think what happens is when you set your tax rate, you're locking into a budget figure for the year. And then DOR lets you spend that budget figure. If you don't go to DOR and say, this is how much money we have to spend this year, and go through the tax rate setting process and lock that in, they won't let you spend it. It has to be down to the penny. You have to lock that in. And that's what you do when you set your tax rate. You're locking in how much revenue you have to spend. If you collect more revenue than that, you can't spend it because you didn't tell DOR you were going to have that revenue and you didn't do a budget for it. So it'll come back to you when the town closes its books, but you have to tell DOR exactly what you have to spend this year. And then they set the tax rate. And unless you do that beforehand, you can't. And that's just a municipal accounting maneuver. Like I said, it doesn't apply to CPA. And that's the extent of my understanding about it, unfortunately. I just know that applies to CPA as well. But it really won't affect you, honestly, because, unless you have a huge project to do this year, you weren't really going to probably use that money until, after next summer when the town closes its books. And there's a workaround too. If you do have a big project that comes up before then, and you need that $500,000, you can bond. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is not going to affect you really.
I think it's just a little intimidating because we haven't done it yet.
Yeah, but don't worry about it. I mean, honestly, you're not even close to being the community that's taken the longest to get set up. West Newbury took 4.5 years before they had their first CPC meeting. And they had to clean up. I mean, I had 6 slides I was training them. Okay, we got to clean up FY 13, 14, 15, and 16. And it's not a big deal. Everyone has to clean up at least 1 year. No one gets organized in time. So this is very normal and very standard and not concerning at all. Margaret, do you have anything to add on that tax rating set process? Can you explain that a little bit?
I don't. It actually makes sense. Well, I don't have a lot to add. There is a recap process that precedes the tax rate setting process every year. So while I don't understand all the details about CPA within that recap process, that's where we actually come up with how much money we're going to need, what the tax rate's going to be in order to reach those revenue goals. So I guess I can understand it. I don't know exactly where CPA falls into the recap setting process, but that's something that we'll obviously learn. I have a feeling, June has already done some of the work for FY20. She actually did do the allocation. She had to. So she has a lot more insight than I do at this point. So unfortunately, I have to go. But boy, this is very informative and I can't wait to read through the presentation later. So everybody enjoy the rest of the training, and Stuart, thank you so much for joining everybody tonight.
All right,
I'll see you later.
Thank you for getting this together, Margaret.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All righty. So let's move on from the budget. All right. So there's the recap. Okay. So the administrative account. This is a very handy account to have. And it is for the running of your committee. Now, unfortunately, you don't have an administrative account right now, right? You don't have you didn't do a budget for FY20, or you didn't do a budget for FY21. So this is the part that will hurt a little bit, unfortunately. I wouldn't worry about the what we just talked about, not having the overall money, but it is going to be a little bit of a bummer that you will not have an administrative budget until July 1st of next year. Unless there actually is a cutesy way we could do that. So we'll talk about that later, actually. I just thought of something. But in a normal year, you can recommend that town meeting give you up to 5%. We would recommend that you do the full amount, that you ask town meeting for the full 5%. And there's no danger in doing that, because whatever you have unspent when the year ends, the town accountant automatically sweeps that back into your account. So if you put aside $25,000 for expenses and you only spend $5,000, that $20,000 is going to go right into your CPA account at the end of the year. And then town meeting will give you a new 5% administrative account. So, but you don't have to. Some communities say, let's ask town meeting for a flat amount. Instead of $25,000, which is 5%, we're going to ask for $10,000 every year. It's up to you. But we think it's a good idea to have that money available to you, because you don't know what you're going to need in the coming year. And the one thing, this is good that Margaret just signed off, because usually I get, things thrown at me, thrown right at the screen and stuff when I say what I'm about to say. But this is your expense account. This is for the running of the CPC, the Community Preservation Committee. This is not for the running of Berlin's CPA program. This is for the running of the Berlin Community Preservation Committee, not the Berlin CPA program. And there's a difference. Other people at town hall are going to work on CPA. The tax collector is going to collect your local surcharge. The town accountant is going to keep your books. Margaret's going to work on putting the warrant together with your warrant articles, and attend a meeting like this, maybe attend some of your other meetings. That is all something they have to do as part of their jobs. They cannot charge the CPA administrative budget for all that work. It is only for your committee and the things your committee needs. It is not for anyone else at town hall in running the CPA program. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what kind of expenses would we run into?
Funny you should ask that, because the next slide talks about what would you use an administrative account? Well, about 2/3 of the community preservation committees have CPA administrators, part-time. I think 3 or 4 have full-time, the really big ones. I think Somerville has someone full-time, Yarmouth, Newton, that might be it actually. Most of them vast majority are part-time. Some of the really small communities don't have anyone, the CPC, does it all themselves with some help from folks at town hall. But you might choose to want, a CPA administrator, someone to work 10 hours a week, 8 hours a week, 5 hours a week, whatever it is, to kind of help you with everything. And that would be charged to the administrative account. Let's see, I'm going to look at a map and see what communities are around you. I know roughly where you are, but Stowe's not too far away, right? They have a part-time administrative assistant. I think she works from home, as an independent contractor, like 10 hours a week. Weston has someone who also does other things at town hall. They work part-time for CPC at town hall and part-time for other boards. Concord has someone who works part-time in the planning department and part-time for CPA. So we do have a number of communities around you that have CPA administrators, and you'll talk about that. Sometimes you wouldn't hire an administrator right off the bat. Usually when the projects get going in your first round of applications, that's when there's a lot of paperwork. So maybe you might talk about that a year from now, but that certainly is one of the most common uses of the administrative account. As you're reviewing applications for projects, you have a whole bunch of due diligence you have to do to make sure these are good projects, right? And you might want to hire, someone's proposing that you fix up, a historic building. you might want to hire a historic preservation consultant to review those plans and make sure they're good and that they're, properly done. The ConsCon comes to you and says, we want to buy a piece of land and Farmer Joe wants $500,000 to sell his farm. Well, the CPC, you're not going to put your name on that project and recommend a town meeting unless you really know it's truly worth 500,000. So you're probably going to want to get an appraisal on that property before you make your recommendation to town meeting. Appraisals on land can cost $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on a piece of land.
We get Sudbury Valley trustees to do them for us for
Good for
free.
you. Tell Krista she's got to do those.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you know Krista.
Krista's terrific, and I have to
Yes.
say, they are an amazing organization, and I was very honored that I received their activism award this year.
Oh, congratulations.
I was really, really honored. So I went to their annual meeting and accepted that award, and they worked really hard in your community to help get CPA passed.
Yep.
They just worked hard in Framingham to get Framingham passed this year. So they really know CPA and are terrific.
Yeah, they really are. They're invaluable to the Conservation Commission in town. And
Yep.
they jointly hold all our conservation restrictions. So
Yeah, they were very excited about you guys having CPA. They worked really hard.
yes.
Very excited. So I was really, really pleased to receive that Lewis Conservation Award. So anyway, so due diligence on these project recommendations. The law requires you to place a couple of ads in the local paper for your public hearing, to let everyone know about it. If you hire an administrative assistant, they might need a computer, a laptop. If they're going to be working from home, maybe you have to buy them a laptop. When you have your public hearing, sometimes it's hard to get people to come. So some CPCs bribe them and have a big spread of food they offer, come eat dinner with us and talk to us about CPA. You could charge that to your administrative budget. Some communities put big signs in front of their projects, thank you, citizens of Berlin, for your CPA funds at work, on town hall while you're doing a big rehab of the historic building, or when you buy a piece of land, you'll put up a nice sign, thank you, citizens, for your participation in approving CPA for this project. So does that give you a good idea of some administrative account?
Yep.
You can see these are all related to the work that you guys are doing. It's not the town's work on CPA. That's just part of everyone's job at town hall now.
Right.
The same way, they don't charge the school committee budget for collecting taxes. 60 or 70% of your taxes are collected for the schools. The tax collector doesn't charge the school committee their budget for collecting those taxes, and same thing with CPA. All right. So if you haven't gone through your Excedrin yet, this is where you'll need the second dose. We're now going to talk about allowable uses. So we're sort of done. Any other questions on the budgeting part of it, the money part of it?
Yeah, just the hint that you suggested there might be an option for us to access some administrative funds this year rather than having to wait.
Yeah, I just remembered I encountered this situation once before, and this idea worked. So normally when you do an administrative budget, you're taking it out of that fiscal year, right? So in the spring, when you're going to recommend an FY22 budget to town meeting, part of that budget in FY22 is going to be your administrative budget, and it's coming out of FY22 money, right? So you're going to have $500,000 in revenue. You're going to ask town meeting to spend 25 of that on your administrative budget. You can't do that this year because you can't touch your FY21 money, right? We already discussed that. The tax rate's been set. That $500,000 you're getting in FY21, you can't touch it. It's in purgatory until this coming summer, when it'll come back to you, when the town closes its books. But what we thought of the last time this happened is we created an administrative budget for FY21 for right now, but we used FY20 money because that money is available to you. That year is over. That money is sitting in your account. But you don't have to go to town meeting to get them to approve that.
Right. I was going to say, because prior year distributions need to be approved at town meeting.
Right. And everything, you guys can't spend any money. You always have to get town meeting approval.
Right.
Once they give you the 25,000 administrative budget, now you can spend that just by a vote of your committee. Hey, we need to do an appraisal on that land, all in favor of hiring an appraiser for $4,000? Yay, and it's spent. But if Margaret has that special town meeting, maybe you should ask her for two placeholders. One is to do the FY21 10% reserve accounts. We already talked about that. And you could have a second warrant article to give yourself an administrative budget with the money coming from your FY20 money. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't want to confuse you with that, but since you asked, here's the idea. And I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. And if she's going to have a town meeting, it'll probably be in, she's January maybe, or.
Well, we had one scheduled for December 5th, but COVID kind of messed that up. So we're not really sure when it's going to be.
Right. Okay. Well, if they weren't willing to have it in December, they might not be willing to have it in January or.
Right.
February.
Right. It's the whole indoor space big enough for people to social distance and stay warm.
Yeah. Yep. That is a problem. All right. So at least you have an idea, though. If you do get lucky with a town meeting coming up, maybe ask Margaret to put two placeholders on there for those two articles. All right. So let's talk about allowable uses. So the budget will become second nature to you, and it'll be fairly automatic every year. But allowable uses are going to come up every single meeting. You're going to see people at the library, and they're going to say, "Hey, I was thinking about you. That CPA fund. Can we use it for this? Can we use it for that?" And your applications are going to come in, and people are going to ask you, about projects, and you'll be looking at this chart very often. And this is called the CPA allowable uses chart. This is a simplified version. There is the official DOR version, which is a little more complex. And I actually sent it to Margaret to distribute to all of you. Normally I pass it out at this training, but I can't do that. So Margaret has that for you. She also has a copy of this presentation as well to distribute to both of you. I sent that to her about 5:30 tonight. All right. So this allowable uses chart, this is what it says in the law about what you can do with your CPA money. And it says it buried in a long gobbledygook paragraph in section 5B2. And it says the CPC can make recommendations for the acquisition, creation, preservation, support of open space and the rehabilitation of open space acquired or created with CPA funds. For the acquisition, creation, preservation of blah, blah, blah. It just goes on, and it's this big gobbledygook paragraph. And frankly, no one understood it until about 2005, DOR came out with this chart, and then all of a sudden, it made sense of what you can do with your CPA money. So don't ever go look back at what people did with their money from 2001 to 2004, because I'm not quite sure anyone knew what they were doing back then, and I was chair of my CPC. So don't look through my skeletons in my closet. But we've had this chart now for a long time, and so now you have no excuse. But it's still not easy to figure out whether a project qualifies for CPA. Some are very simple, but others are pretty complicated. So let's step through this chart. So the top part makes sense, right? Those are the four categories. We know that. If it's not an open space project, a historic project, a recreation project, or a housing project, it's not eligible for funding, period. Someone comes to you and asks you to pave Main Street, there's nothing on this chart, a category that talks about street paving. So it has to be in one of those four categories. But unfortunately, CPA doesn't cover every open space expense or every historic expense. It has to be an expense justified by one of those verbs on the left-hand side. So you can acquire land with CPA fund. Everyone mostly knows about that. That's kind of the genesis of CPA. It really started as a land acquisition for open space and recreation to protect, we had land disappearing on the 495 belt right in your neck of the woods, 20, 30 years ago, when people were just developing like crazy, and development was really rampant, and we were losing a ton of woods and open space, and That's where CPA was developed. And it was really developed as a land protection and land acquisition act. We've turned it into a lot more, but the basis of CPA was that top row: acquisition of land for conservation land, acquisition of historic buildings, acquisition of land for parks and playgrounds and athletic fields, and acquisition of land to build affordable housing. So that one's pretty clear. And then it goes on, and each one of these verbs has a definition in section 2 of the act. The act is about 17 pages long. Anyone actually read the CPA Act, the entire law? Someone's nodded their head. I'm impressed. When did you
I read part, oh, go ahead.
did you read that late at night? Because you might not have stayed awake if you were trying to read that late at night. But it's about 17 pages. It's actually, did you find it fairly easy? It's not that bad. I guess you might not have your microphone on there.
Yeah, no, you know, it's like you said, it's 17 pages, and a lot of it, you know, I was somewhat familiar with, just because I've talked to people on CPA committees from other towns, so
Right.
they hinted at a lot of it. And
Okay.
there's logic to it, so it's.
And for those of you that haven't read it, the one part that I think is valuable to read is section 2, which is the definitions. In any law, the definitions are usually where the rubber meets the road. And all these words, you'll find a definition of what open space means and what historic means and what recreation means as far as CPA. It doesn't matter what other people think of historic. It matters what's in the definition of historic in the CPA legislation. And doesn't matter what everyone else considers to be preservation or preserve. It matters what the CPA legislation defines that as. So that's the one section I would suggest you read, is the section 2, which is the definitions. And then you'll have a better understanding of these words, and it'll be a little easier for you to figure out what projects are allowable or not.
I was on the committee that brought CPA to town meeting. And so I definitely read some of it because people were asking,
Right.
you know, hey, what can we do with this? And one of the things that I very much remember as far as recreation goes, like you can't build an athletic facility. You can't build a building
Right.
that supports recreation, but you can build a new soccer field, but
Yeah,
you can't build the snack shack that supports the soccer field.
It's for outdoor recreational activities only.
Right.
There are a few, Carolyn, there are a few little, over the years, DOR has opined that there are a few little exceptions to that. If there's a small, modest structure that directly supports the outdoor use,
Like the snack shack.
the snack shack, a bathroom, and a storage shed are the 3 that we've seen commonly referred to. Those are okay, but anything where recreation is happening inside 4 walls, that is not eligible for funding. You know,
Right.
Outdoor, it's an open space program, frankly, is where it started. So, all right, so 2 that jump out at people, and they always ask, so I'll just jump right to the explanation. People always ask, why is support only in the housing category? And you'll notice the housing category has the most available verbs, and that's on purpose. The legislature knew that housing was going to be really hard. It's the toughest category in CPA. You will see it's hard to create affordable housing. It's expensive, it's politically charged, you need land. It's a tough category, and they wanted to give everyone as many tools as they could. So, and the other thing with housing is you're always spending hundreds of thousands of dollars before you even put a shovel in the ground, maybe millions of dollars, you know, plans, designs, permitting, feasibility studies, architects, engineers, all that is covered under support because they know you have to spend a lot of money before you can actually put a shovel in the ground.
So just real quick, and I'm just curious. So does this basically mean that the town would own houses that they then rent?
Very, very rarely.
Okay.
You probably don't have do you have a housing authority, or you do not?
We don't right now, and we're working with the consortium that works with Hudson Stowe, you know, probably familiar with those guys.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to accept an application on our behalf to become a member of that consortium. In which case we've discussed with them the possibility of acquisition of property, although they've said their member towns have all decided that it's probably more of a headache than any municipality wants to take on. But they'd entertain the conversation, and maybe some of the other towns within the consortium would begin to explore the opportunity to set up some sort of structure amongst ourselves that we could possibly acquire and rent and then possibly sell at a later date. So that's the option that we're looking at. But again, that's with this funding available to be utilized in that fashion, that would be an opportunity that we'd want to explore, I think, with them.
Right. And that would be great, if you could pull that together. But typically, if you don't have a housing authority, the vast majority of your housing money is going to be in cooperation with a nonprofit developer or a for-profit developer or Habitat for Humanity or other nonprofits who build affordable housing. Typically, they're going to be doing the projects and you're going to be a funding source to help them.
The good news for Berlin is that we're currently at 16%. And
wow,
Yeah.
really? That's
Yeah.
phenomenal. How did you get there?
well, we squeezed an apartment complex into the southern part of town with 84 units that are part of a LIP. So 21 of those are affordable, but all 84 count. So we were pretty close to 10% for years, and this bumped us way up. So
That's great.
with the new census, we'll probably drop down to 13.5, 14% because the housing units will increase as a result of the census. But we should have a cushion of 40 units or so, which means we could build another 400 units in town and still be within 10%. So
Right.
if
Well,
we're proactive with money from CPA to work with groups like Habitat, like you've suggested, we really don't have to build too many units because we can tell all the 40Bs that come in that we're not interested in to go to hell now, which is going to
Yeah.
be exciting. So
And that's a great position to be in, because now when you look at your CPA, when you do your CPA plan, that's the time to get creative. It's like, okay, we're not just trying to pack in as many units as we can to meet that 10%, goal. What do we really need here? It would be great to have scattered Habitat units all, around, 2 or 3 of those around, or maybe we need more senior housing, but you're going to really have some great flexibility. And now you're going to have some money to make that happen, to really dig into what your needs are and just do what your town needs as opposed to what anyone else wants to build. So that's a great position to be in.
We can do Tim's tiny house park.
The tiny houses are coming. They're a little tough to permit now, but I think their day is coming. Who did a tiny, I think IKEA. Does anyone get the IKEA newsletter? I think they built a tiny house in each of their stores. Yeah, like, and to, to showcase all their compact furniture and stuff they have.
Right.
The last thing I'll talk about on this chart, and then we should probably move on, is this last category, rehabilitate or restore. So it's a disjointed category because you'll see that 2 things in there, historic and recreation. The allowable usage charts allows you to restore any historic building, no matter whether you acquired it with CPA funds or not. And same thing with parks and playgrounds and athletic fields. But when it comes to open space and housing, you can only work on those assets if those were acquired or created with CPA funds. So
like an invasives removal project
well,
on town that we already own, land that we already own couldn't be used.
incredible that you picked the one exception here.
Yes.
This is where it gets fun on the allowable uses chart. And this is also where you need your Excedrin or my telephone number to talk about it. The definition of preserve is protect an asset from injury, harm, or destruction. It's a very simple definition in section 2. And one of the few projects in the open space category that you can justify under preserve and not rehabilitate would be invasive species. Because if you don't take them out, they will injure or harm or destroy that open space. So DOR has opined that, there aren't many types of projects that fit into that preservation of open space box, but invasive species is one of them. So that's a great example, because that's kind of how you have to use this chart. You have to look at the project and really not just the description of the project, but what the money's actually going to be spent on. What is the CPA dollars going to be spent on? And then you have to look on this chart and find a box that justifies those expenditures. So in invasive species, we're going to hire an outside firm that's going to come in and, pull weeds by hand, or they're going to do an alum, treatment in our pond or whatever it is. And that's what the money is going to be spent on. That would be justified in the preserved box under open space. We're going to buy a piece of land from the Conservation Commission for conservation purposes as up for sale. That's the yes in the acquire open space box. We're going to fix up Johnson Park, which is in terrible shape, and it needs new fencing, and it needs new lighting, and it needs new shrubbery, and it needs some new walkways that's rehabilitation in the recreation category. That's rehabilitation of Johnson Park. We're going to get with the other towns in that consortium, and we're going to acquire some land to build a habitat house. So that's acquisition of housing, land for housing. So that's kind of how you use the chart. And you will find that it is sometimes difficult to really figure out if there's a box that justifies it. If you can't find a box on this chart that says yes, or yes, if acquired or created with CPA funds, it's not eligible for funding. You got to be able to stuff the project or the expenses of that project in the box.
Is your advice to have a committee be somewhat conservative in its use of definitions in this chart in its initial years, rather than setting precedent with being a little too open?
Yeah, I do think that's smart. As everyone's getting used to CPA, as you are getting more used to CPA, I think there are probably two things to consider. One is to kind of go for the core of what the program is all about, rather than picking around on the edges. Everything has a gray line. These look like black and white chart lines, but they're really gray lines. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out. And we always suggest, at least in the beginning, go for the solid projects that are the heart of the program. Go for what people really thought they were getting when they voted for this, rather than sort of picking around the gray areas or the edges. The other advice I usually give to new community preservation committees is, in their first, few projects, find one or two that are really very visible. It's great to do, a feasibility study on a piece of land to see if we can build housing there, but there's nothing tangible to see for that. And, so for the first round of projects, it's nice to have, a big ball field that's completely redone, or a park that's fixed up, or a brand new piece of open space that's acquired, or a historic treasure in town that's rehabilitated. Something, that people can really feel proud about and hang their hat on. You can put a big sign in front of it saying CPA did this, and people can really see the tangible benefits of the program. It's not certainly a requirement. This is just sort of a best practice sort of thing, but it's not required in any way. But we always suggest to folks that they look for, a project or two in the beginning to really demonstrate visually to people how the program works.
So here's a question.
Yep.
If we as the committee decide that, Sally's project fits one of these categories, but DOR doesn't agree, how does that mechanism happen? And then what happens about the money?
Great question. So there are three places you can go to for help with figuring out whether something's allowable. We help tons of communities figure that out, but we are not attorneys. You'll see that little disclaimer down the bottom of my email. We know the law really good. We have a gigantic file of previous opinions from DOR and other towns and that sort of thing, and some experience in that. So we can definitely help. In the same way, DOR can help but their opinion is advisory. You don't go to DOR for permission to do projects. This is a local program. You can certainly try. It's very hard to get in touch with them these days. Their number of staff attorneys has been cut, probably to a third of what it used to be, over time as the state has cut back. And so it can be tough to get them on the phone or to get them to answer an email. But certainly they do. And again, their opinion is advisory. The third one is your town council, and that's the one that really counts. So they are the final decision maker for your town, is your local town council. And certainly whenever you have something that's really sticky, you want to get your town council's opinion. And that's why you have an administrative budget, because you can say to Margaret, hey, we can't really make a decision on this one. This one's hard, and we've talked to the coalition and they gave us some advice, and we even talked to DOR, but we really want town council to give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And, usually you have to go through your selectman or Margaret to get access to town council.
Yep.
But you ask them to, ask town council and tell town council to itemize, the time they spend working on that on their bill, and then that can be charged to the CPA administrative budget because your committee needed to know that question. If Margaret has a question on CPA or the assessor has a question on CPA, that has to come out of the town's legal budget.
Right.
It's a question about CPA, but it's not your committee's question.
Right.
So that's what I'd recommend. The good thing about, coming to us or maybe inquiring about DOR is that doesn't cost anything. Every time you go to town council, it's going to cost you something.
And indeed it does.
So you're certainly not going to want to run to them first, or you're not going to run to them for everything. But if you really need a definitive legal opinion, that's where you got to go.
Okay.
And almost always it'll be a question about this chart, about whether a project is okay or not.
Sure.
All right. Yes.
Supposing we approve something and whatever opinions we got said yes, or we, perhaps we asked you, you said yes. And supposing in the end, someone has decided after the fact that it didn't fit, is there any way it can be stopped or punished for failing? Like you said, that in the first few years before the start, there was less sense of how it worked. Is there any mechanism to go back or is it just something where, well, we thought it was good at the time and everyone just has to suck it up?
Right. That's generally it. So first of all, let me say that you as, committee members have no, personal liability issues. You're making the best decisions that you can as volunteers for the town. I've never seen a situation where an individual on a CPC had to take any, responsibility for something that was done in good faith. So I would not worry about that at all. And, that applies for anyone, someone on the CONSCOM, who, even if, CONSCOMs get sued or regulatory boards get sued all the time, the town takes care of that. It's not, you don't have to lie. You have no personal liability on something like that unless it's malfeasance. So that's the first thing to make you more comfortable. And the second thing is CPA is no different than any town appropriation. So the same procedure for someone to challenge an appropriation applies to CPA as applies to the school budget and the road budget and everything. It's called the 10 taxpayer lawsuit. If 10 taxpayers in town get together and they feel that a mistake has been made or something's not right, they can sue the town. And then the town will defend that. The town's legal department will defend that. So that is really the main recourse that folks have. It's pretty rare. It does happen. I mean, Acton got sued over a decision they made to fund a project at a church. Some of you might have heard about that, to do a CPA historic preservation project at a local church, and they were sued. And it actually is the only time ever that a CPA case went all the way up to the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. And we have a big article on that on our website, the famous Acton case. But it's pretty darn rare that a town gets sued by a 10 taxpayer lawsuit for regular stuff, and it's even exceedingly rare for a CPA item. But that's the main recourse people have. Now, of course, there's also, embarrassment. I mean, if someone does something wrong and, it's really bad, it can be embarrassing. You see headlines in the newspaper all the time about, municipalities doing something wrong and it being embarrassing, and the big articles on the front page of the Globe or whatever. So that certainly can happen. But in general, really the only main real recourse is the 10 taxpayer lawsuit.
Okay. I was mostly questioning it in terms of whose interpretation of the law, held sway. So it sounds like basically, unless there was a legal challenge that, however we proceeded, assuming it was in good faith, even if we proceeded incorrectly, that our interpretation and approval by town meeting would be controlling unless challenged.
Correct. Or unless someone asks your town council to look at it and they reject it. Town council they have that power to say, no, we've looked at this again and it's not okay, and so we can't move forward with it. But, once money has been spent, if it was a mistake, you just chalk it up to people, unless it was, some type of, malfeasance or embezzlement or something deliberate, it happens. There've been close to 13,000 projects. They're not all perfect projects. There definitely are projects there that people just, for whatever reason, just didn't have the best information at the time, or did it in good faith, or, interpretations have changed over time. It happens. And it's usually not something that is too much of an issue. And remember, you guys can't spend any money. You're just making recommendations to town meeting. It's on them to make the appropriation. You're not making the appropriation. You're just making a recommendation. They certainly rely on you to know your stuff and make good recommendations, but we're all human.
Okay.
All right. So we're getting toward the end here. I did want to mention that you can bond with CPA funds in the same way your town bonds against its regular revenue stream to build a new school or to buy a fire truck. You can bond against your future CPA revenue stream. You can only bond against the local surcharge. That state match goes up and down. It's not a reliable funding source. So you can only bond against that 3% local surcharge. It does ratchet up the level of approval you need at town meeting. Most of the projects where you make recommendations to town meeting are going to be passed at a majority vote at town meeting. There are 3 instances where it needs the 2/3. Bonding always requires 2/3. Most town councils will make you get a 2/3 vote to buy land. And if you take something by eminent domain, which can be done with CPA funds and has been done with CPA funds. You can take something by eminent domain with CPA funds. That needs a 2/3 as well. Although you can bond in the future, you can't pay back existing bonds with CPA funds. So if the town bought a piece of open space 5 years ago with a bond and they have 10 more years to pay that bond off, you can't pay that with CPA funds because it wasn't bonded under authority of CPA. It was bonded under a different authority. It was bonded under general municipal revenues. So this can be very powerful. And frankly, it's really the only money you have right now, except for that little bit of money from last year. If something came along big and they were having a big special town meeting in January for some big, huge thing, we've had it happen with CPA. Some huge projects have come along out of the blue very early, and bonding is available to you right now. And about 2/3 of our communities have bonded over the years. So it's pretty popular.
And it usually short term or?
Well, you can go up to 30 years now. About 5 years ago, the state extended the maximum deadline for most projects from 20 to 30 years. So some communities, you know, when they buy land, they'll go 30 years. Land is forever, so why not? You know, we have one community that I thought was a brilliant strategy. Whenever they buy land with CPA funds, they always bond it, even if they have the money in the bank. And their feeling is that this land is going to be owned by the town forever. People are going to enjoy this open space or this park forever. So why should the full burden of the purchase be on the current taxpayers? Why not pay it forward and allow the taxpayers for the next 30 years to pay a piece of that if they're going to be the ones enjoying it over the next 30 years? I thought that was a really interesting strategy.
Sure.
You know, make everyone pay for it in the future because they're going to be using it too.
Can this be used for rail trails?
Absolutely. And the last thing I'll give you, and I'll give you the option to cut it off, or we can go give some examples of CPA projects. I do have some pictures of rail trails and examples. So we'll decide as a group together in a few minutes whether you want to all go off and have your dinner or go to bed, or I can run through some sample projects real quick. So, but rail trails is definitely in that grouping. All right, so the process of which CPA projects happen, I think that's become clear over the night as we've gone on. You will probably want to create an application, you know, materials that people will submit. And we have samples of applications from all around the state on our website. So again, feel free to grab someone else's application that looks good to you, or pick and choose among 3 good ones and combine the best of each. So people will submit an application. Most communities set a deadline, you know, sometime in the mid to late fall, you know, for their CPA applications. Then you folks are going to review those projects. You're going to bring the applicants into your meeting probably to talk about it. You're going to do your due diligence, maybe talk to some other boards. And then sometime before the town meeting warrant closes, you're going to vote to make a recommended list of projects for town meeting. And then town meeting votes on the project. So that's the process, how it plays out every year. Now, once that project gets to town meeting, town meeting's options are a little bit more limited than usual. They can approve your recommendations. They can reject your recommendations. They can approve them, but give you less money. So they'd say, yeah, we love the idea of renovating that athletic field, but you know, you're asking us to build a Taj Mahal at $500,000. Let's scale this project back, and we're going to appropriate $250 and go back and figure out, you know, do we really need artificial turf? You know, do we really need, you know, a new fence, or can the old one stay up? That sort of thing. And then the last thing is pretty obscure and it's rarely used, but they can reject the project, but order the money sent to the appropriate reserve account. I think this was used, the design of this was that if the project you were recommending, if you hadn't put money in your housing reserve account that year, you were counting on a housing project to pass, you know, that represent, because remember the 10% is spend or reserve. So, you know, most times we recommend people, they just reserve it right off the top. So, you know, you've done it, but sometimes people say, well, we have a huge project this year in housing, that'll be our 10%. But then if that project fails at town meeting, now you're out of alignment with the law's requirement to spend or reserve 10%. And so I think this was DOR's attempt to make, you know, make that happen. If you had a project rejected at town meeting, the money could go into the reserve account instead, but I can't see the logistics of how that would happen on town meeting 4, frankly. You can kind of forget number 4. All righty. All right, so rolling through just some of the basic, these are sort of the 5 basic tenets of CPA that some we've touched on, but some we haven't. CPA is definitely a new and additional funding source. It is not designed for you to now pay for things that the town has already paid for out of their general budget in the past. It's not designed to move your entire Parks and Recs budget over to CPA. These for new initiatives. Anything the town has paid for out of its budget in the past, they should continue paying for that. CPA is not designed to supplant spending that the municipality normally does. You can never pay any maintenance or operating expenses with CPA. So if you build a new park, that's great. You can build the park. You can buy the land for the park with CPA. You can build the park with CPA. But if a teeter-totter breaks, the town's got to figure out a way to fix that. If the grass needs cutting, DPW or the Parks Department's got to cut the grass. If you need to buy a new shrub because one died, someone's got to figure that out. If you need to run a soccer league on that new field, operating expense, someone else has got to pay for that. You're the capital expenditure people, not the maintenance or operating people. We talked about recreation is for outdoor projects only. Anytime you buy land with CPA, it has to be permanently restricted for the reason you bought it. So if you're going to buy open space, there's going to be a conservation restriction that's going to be written on that land, and probably Sudbury Valley would hold it, and the town would own the land. If you bought land for housing, in that case, probably the town would hold the housing restriction and the land would be sold off. So there's, those two pieces, the ownership of the land and the restriction, and they have to be separate. But we'll get into that more when we talk about projects in the future. As we've talked about, no one else can initiate a project at town meeting. No one else can put a CPA expenditure on the warrant. I mean, they can put it on the warrant if they want to, but if the moderator gets to that warrant article at town meeting and you guys haven't first made a recommendation, they have to pass over that article. Nothing can be voted on at town meeting unless you guys have first issued a recommendation. Conversely, you can't spend any money except your administrative money after it's appropriated from town. Any questions on that? All right, and this is, I think, the last slide, but this is kind of where I get on my soapbox a little bit. And normally I'm doing this presentation with a lot of municipal officials in the room too, the accountant, the town manager, the recreation director, et cetera, but pandemic changed that. But in general, this goes back to what I just talked about, this supplanting idea. The town has a budget every year. And that's generally a top-down affair, right? It's very hard for individual citizens to really affect the town's budget. It's the town manager, the finance committee, the selectmen, and then town meeting, usually puts a rubber stamp on the budget for the most part. So it's very much a top-down affair, the town's budget, the regular 100% of the money the town has to spend. But this new 3% surcharge really is designed to be a bottoms up. This was something the grassroots citizens of Berlin voted for. This is something they agreed to voluntarily. And the ideas for CPA should come from them. Everyone gets to apply for CPA money. There's no really restriction on who can apply for funding. It can be community groups. It can be, citizens who have a great idea and go, champion their idea for a new park. They go champion that to the Parks Department. You want to cast a wide net. This is the community's fund. Everyone in the community should feel free to express their ideas on the best ways to spend this fund. And then that percolates up through you to town meeting. Both of these end up in the same place, right? They both end up being approved at town meeting. But as opposed to being a top-down situation like the general budget, CPA is really a grassroots, bottoms-up approach. And the communities that really get this and understand it, have phenomenal CPA programs. But there are some communities where, the municipal officials kind of try to take control of the CPC and they try to take control of the budget, and they just supplement their regular spending with this. They just view it as something like, what can we get within the law? What can we get CPA to pay for so we can offload it from our regular budget? And we've had programs, unfortunately, that head in that direction that don't have real strong community preservation committees to fight that off. And there usually are problems. Either people proposed to reduce the amount of money from 3% to 0.5%. We've had that happen to communities. We haven't had anyone revoke it, but we've had people bring it to town meeting to revoke it. Gotten voted down in all cases, but it has happened. This is just something to think about, as you structure your program. But that was the intent of CPA. So I have about 10 slides that show examples of, in each of the categories of CPA money being spent, but we have always, said the training is 2 hours. So I can probably roll through these in the 6 minutes or 7 minutes we have left, or we can call it a night. It's up to you folks if you want to see some examples of what other communities have done.
I think I can live with another few minutes. I think we can keep going.
Okay. All right. Everyone on board with that? I'll do this quick. I'll do the express route of projects, but it is kind of inspirational and fun to see what other communities have done with CPA and what you can do with your money. So starting with the historic category, the biggest, most popular use of CPA historic money is to restore municipal buildings. That big tower you see on the left-hand side is Gloucester Town Hall. Right after they passed CPA basically to fix up that building. That building was in such bad shape that every time the wind blew over 40 knots, they had to evacuate the building because they were afraid that tower was going to fall on top of the building. And Gloucester City Hall was built on the top of a hill so that when the fishermen made the last turn into the harbor and they looked up, that's what they saw. I mean, it's an iconic building. It's the pride of that community. And that's why they passed CPA. And they immediately did a $3 million bond and completed the whole exterior restoration. And now they're going to move indoor when that bond is paid off. The guy sitting and doing gold leaf is on the top of Needham Town Hall. That is still probably 10 years later, the largest ever CPA project, a $15 million top to bottom rehab of this spectacular town hall in Needham. And then I think that that community room is the upstairs of the town hall, I think in Tingsboro, maybe. A lot of these old town halls, I've never been in Berlin Town Hall. We'd be there tonight, I think, if we didn't have this pandemic. I always love seeing some of the historic town halls in Massachusetts. And a lot of them have these big, beautiful rooms upstairs where they would have town meeting and plays and town dances around the turn of the century. And a lot of them have been fallen into disrepair or broken up. And this one was completely restored back to its original glory. Taking unused historic, oh, sorry, does someone want to say something? No? Okay. Taking unused historic buildings, might not be too many in your town, but there are in some, and turning them back into productive buildings is a real popular use of CPA money. In the top right there, that's an old shoe factory in Middleborough that has now been turned into housing. The people with the golden shovels are doing the groundbreaking at the Center Town Hall renovation in Chelmsford. Chelmsford has 3 town halls, actually. The one they use, which is an old school, and they have these 2 little wood frame buildings in north and south that were abandoned. And they fixed them both up with CPA money, used the same contractor, one big bond at the same time, turned one into an arts center and the other into a community meeting space. Really spectacular. We had our 2015 conference in this building because it was so spectacular right after it was redone. In the yellow building down in the corner there, that's an unused library in Cohasset, which is now 2 units of affordable housing. CPA doesn't have to be spent just on municipal assets. There are ways, although you have to be careful about it, but there are ways to use it on nonprofit properties. In the top left, that Ivy building is the last whip factory in Westfield. Westfield is known as the Whip City because in the 1800s, there are 11 whip factories, and I mean like horse and buggy whip factories. This is the last remaining one that still makes horse whips. And they're turning it into a museum of the history of the whip factory in the Whip City of Westfield. Bottom right is the Abigail Adams homestead where Abigail Adams was born. This building was in such bad shape. It's owned by a nonprofit, the Abigail Adams Society. There was graffiti on this building. It was in terrible shape. We have a success story on our website with some of the before pictures of that property. And if any of you have been to Northampton, you recognize the Academy of Music, this spectacular music hall and dance hall, and which is right on the main street. And they did the whole facade over, the historic facade with CPA funds in Northampton. Northampton has done a phenomenal job with CPA. They're everywhere you go in town, there are big signs of all the CPA projects they've done and all the open space they've purchased and the recreation. They're spectacular. With historic preservation, it's not just buildings, it's also documents and artifacts. So we've had 3 copies of the Declaration of Independence that have been found moldy in town meeting vaults. One was sent to each of the towns at the time to be ratified into their town meeting vote. That woman down there is Pat Shields. That was my former town clerk in Boxford, our former town clerk, who I love her little white gloves as she's showing the books that were all restored from the 1600s. A lot of communities find these, that moldy green book, they find this stuff and it has spectacular records in them. And you can use CPA funds now to rehabilitate those books. Moving on to the recreation category and open space. Playgrounds are a huge use of CPA funds, whether school playgrounds or municipal playgrounds. We've literally now had hundreds of playgrounds rehabilitated with CPA funds. I really wish, if I had done a little bit of insider trading with CPA when in 2012, we changed the law in the recreation category to make it a little easier to do this. I probably should have invested. If I had known, I would have invested in all the playground manufacturing companies because they must be making a killing off CPA. Because literally hundreds of playgrounds have been rehabilitated since 2012 when the law changed slightly to make it a little easier. Athletic fields and athletic complexes, buying the land for athletic complexes or just rehabilitating ones you have or building more amenities on land you already owned is a huge use of CPA funds. Down in the bottom right corner, that's the girls softball field in Bridgewater. The woman in the green shirt is Marilee Hunt. She was the CPA chair and she had a daughter that played softball and the girls didn't have their own softball field. And so they got shunted all around town. The boys had their softball field and the girls would get to play on the boys field, but only at the worst times, like when the mosquitoes came out at 8 o'clock and the light was fading. That's when the girls got their spot on the fields. And she was determined when she became CPA chair to build a girls softball field. And they did it. It took a long time, but they used CPA funds and that's the field. And it's much nicer than the boys field. And now they get the mosquito spot if they want to use the girls field. There's the rail trails we talked about in East Hampton. Newburyport is the top left. And I don't know where the bottom right is. I can't recall. But tons of money has been spent on rail trails or other types of off-road biking trails. You can't do on-road stuff with CPA and you can't use CPA money for sidewalks. That was another lawsuit. The town of Norwell got sued for appropriating money they felt on the advice of their town council. MJ, this is actually the situation you were just asking about. They got an application from the town to do sidewalks along a new road or a road that was being rehabbed, but they didn't have money for sidewalks in the budget. The budget for the sidewalks got cut from the budget. So they said, well, we'll use CPA money for the sidewalks. And they sent it to town council and town council said, fine. And they did it at town meeting. They did call us and we told them how we felt about it, but just an advisory opinion. And sure enough, they got sued by 10 taxpayers and the court decided in favor of the taxpayers and they never were able
That was fairly recent.
It was about 2 years ago.
Yeah. Weren't they claiming they were trails, urban trails?
They called them path walks.
Oh, right.
They thought that if they gave it a different name than sidewalk, it was a path walk. And the judge was like, what is this path walk? This is a sidewalk.
That was part of why they lost, the fact that they were kind of being a little shady about how they were doing it.
I think so. I mean, look, in general, it was exactly the situation we talked about, this top down, bottom down. The budget was getting tight for the road and the town said, we don't want to pay for the sidewalks. It's $500,000. We don't want to increase the budget. This road project's expensive. Let's get CPA to pay for that. And that's the attitude sometimes where sometimes CPA is asked to pay for things that the town has always paid for and traditionally is paid for out of the regular budget. I mean, if they're legal, certainly it's okay, here and there, to do some capital projects that the town might ordinarily pay for, but now CPA can. Certainly not the gray area ones.
But like playgrounds,
Yeah. I
we
mean,
just put a new playground in at the elementary school a couple of years ago.
and you pay for that
And-
out of your regular budget.
Yeah.
And the next one you do, you probably should pay for it out of CPA. It's okay.
Right.
But you don't want to do all that. You don't want all your projects to be, offloading municipal budget type things. You gotta have a healthy balance. So parks are another great example. We've had skateboard parks, we've had those water parks built with CPA funds, little tiny pocket parks. This is just a little in Barnstable, a little pocket park that was a trash strewn alleyway between two main streets, and they turned it into just this little pocket park. It's a little trail, the brick trail. And top right, look at that. I've gone over my time. You shouldn't have done this. I get talking about CPA, I get excited. Top right, that's a park in Weymouth. That was a dilapidated garage. And they took down the garage with CPA funds, because if you take down a building and then you leave it open and build a park or open space, that is creation of open space, creation of recreational land. And now there's this little pocket park, that's the Herring River, and those blue railings, that's where everyone stands to do the annual herring count, where they count the herring going up the ladder. The fish ladder is on the other side of that blue railing. And you couldn't see it. You didn't even know the river was back there because there was a building blocking it. And now it's this cute little Herring Cove Park. Community gardens, another big, huge part of CPA all over the Commonwealth. So in the affordable housing, CPA can pay for housing up to 100% of area median income. Most people consider affordable housing to be up to 80%, but CPA can go higher than that. And these are the actual figures in your town. We pulled from the HUD housing figures. So if someone, if you built some CPA housing in town and a family of 4, they could live in that housing if they earn up to $111,000. So people are sometimes surprised at the figures are higher than they think. So, it can it can really help people, who work in town, the school teachers or the firefighters or the policemen, who might earn a really good living, as they should, but they don't qualify for the real affordable housing, the Habitat property or the 80%. But there's a need there too. Excuse me. So that's I'm so sorry. That's the housing numbers. Thank you. See, it's really good that I'm not in a room, because you'd all be running for the exit now, right? If I was sneezing on top of you. So this is great. I'm alone. Affordable housing, we've had a number of communities that have built housing for veterans, which is terrific. It's Dartmouth, Quincy, and Weymouth, 3 different housing properties for veterans. Again, using historic buildings for other purposes, you can also use them for housing. The one in the bottom left, I love. This was an abandoned nursing home in the center of North Andover. It had been empty for years, and a developer bought it, and CPA was the first one to invest money in that and help him make that a complete rehabilitation into affordable housing in North Andover. This is a terrific project in Lexington. This was a historic and a housing project. That building was an old printing factory 100 years ago, and it was rehabbed using CPA funds into 12 units for folks that have brain injuries, that get services and have 24-hour live-in help. They can be semi-independent, and this building is run by a nonprofit called Supportive Living Incorporated. And this was such a success that SLI bought a closed inn, a 9-room inn in Rockport, and turned that into another home for folks with brain injuries. Habitat, like I mentioned, is a huge partner. We've had 50 or 60 different communities that have partnered with Habitat. They are the most efficient builders of affordable housing in the world, really, in terms of what they can build for the price. And we had a lot of communities partner with their local technical high school. Those kids down in the left-hand corner were helping on an affordable housing project in Lincoln, just down the road from you. So that's a good explanation of some of the projects. That's me in the middle there in my heavier days, visiting an affordable housing project in on Martha's Vineyard. And the guy to the left is head of the Island Housing Authority, and to the right is the builder. His name is Farley. And these are 9 units of housing that are built so incredibly energy efficient, because when you build affordable housing, you know, you have to make it energy efficient because the folks won't have a ton of money to invest in heat and electricity. It's got to be really efficient. And Farley builds these buildings so efficient with double wall construction. You know, those little Mitsubishi Mr. Slim units that you see, that, you know, the little heat pumps, that the white thing that goes to the top of the room comes to the
Yeah.
wall.
Yep. I have one in my garage.
Okay, one heat pump like that heats and cools this entire house. Now, it's not a huge house, it's 1,500 square feet, but it's 2 levels, and one heat pump heats and cools that whole thing. That's how incredibly efficient this is. Oh, there's solar panels on the ceiling too. By the way, affordable housing with solar panels on the ceiling, so these people don't have an electric bill.
Nice.
So, you know, these are some of the great inspirational projects, you know, we see all over the state. It is a terrific program. You are going to love it. You're going to have fun on this committee. It's the most fun committee. I mean, who wants to be on a regulatory board? You know, your conscom, you know, permits for septic systems. This is real fun. You know, you get to spend money, you get to do great projects, get to make people happy, and really invest in your community and the quality of life. So I wish you a lot of luck. We will be here to help you all the way through. Chase is our communications director. We're about to hire a replacement for our research and outreach director who left earlier this year to start her own business. So there'll be 3 of us soon in the office, and we'd love to help you get set up. So make us part of your team, and we'll help you get up and running.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So you suggest that we meet again after the first of the year? Is that what I heard?
That's up to you. You know, I think you have not organized yet, right? You don't have a chair and a vice chair, so
Correct.
you'll have to rely on Margaret to get you organized for one more meeting, I think. And then I think the first topic on the agenda probably should be to, you know, organize yourselves, get a chair and a vice chair, maybe set up a meeting schedule for the rest of the year, you know, 3rd Tuesday of the month, you know, all compare your schedules and find, you know, you're all on other boards, a lot of you on other boards. So you'll want to try to find one free night, you know, a month, or maybe 2 in the beginning, 2 free nights a month. It's up to you. Most CPCs either meet once or twice a month, you know, for the busy months, and then maybe either take off July or August or drop down to just once over the summer. You know, it's up to you. You'll feel your way there, but that would be the suggested topics for the first meeting is, you know, organizing yourselves, setting a meeting schedule, you know, swapping phone numbers. Everyone has a roster of all your phone numbers and contact information, and then start talking about the CPA plan. And maybe, you know, divvy up assignments. One person can go on, you know, and line and do some research on our website and pick some good plans. Another person, their job is going to be to gather up the town's master plan and affordable housing plan. You know, you can kind of divvy up all this work beginning with that, and then, you know, start working on the plan.
Excellent.
All right. Sorry to overwhelm you. I know it's a lot, but just remind Margaret to send this presentation out so you have it. And the DOR version of the allowable uses chart, which is a little more detailed, and let us know what else you need.